Hello, everyone, and welcome to this amazing session. So basically, this is not only a session, this is a starting of a journey for a complete series that we'll be doing. My name is Sayam Pathak. I'm a CNCF ambassador working as Director of Technical Evangelism at Zivo, building the next gen cloud platform based on K3S. You can find me on Twitter at Sayam Pathak, where I tweet all about technology and sometimes about some of the motivational things that I keep to myself to keep myself motivated. And if you are new to the channel, please care to subscribe so that I can keep doing all this stuff after the working hours. And yeah, if you are watching it on Twitch, so then do a follow over there. I think that's how it works. So really excited to have two amazing folks with me, and really excited to have the community with me. So thank you all for joining in, and we'll be kicking off with Knative series. So this is a Knative series that we are starting today. And this is the first part where we'll be discussing about the origin story and the governance, the community, the foundations, for Knative. So Knative is a huge project out there, and we'll be talking all about that. But the origin story, like how it originated, the problem scenarios, the governance around it, what was it, what is it now, and how where it is heading to. So very interesting things. And this will set the right foundation for the next set of series which are coming up, which will be like Knative 101, eventing deep dive, serving deep dive, cloud events, and all those things. So we'll be having amazing set of demos by amazing folks for that. So I see a lot of great folks have already joined. So hello everyone. I'll just put you on the screen because you have joined, so you should be on the screen. So welcome everyone, and again, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. So today I'm joined by Ville and Matt, amazing people in the community, and I'm pretty sure that you already know both of them. But still, I would like you both to introduce yourself so that in detail.
Go, Matt.
All right. So, hi, I'm Matt. I'm one of the folks who started Knative now a few years ago at Google. I've been doing stuff in the containers tool space for, a bunch of years before that. And I, until recently, when I took a break, which I'm currently on, I was mostly focused on the serving side of Knative. Ville?
All right. Yeah, so I'm Ville. Thanks for all watching. Hopefully we don't waste your entire hour here. Yeah, so I also am one of the folks who started Knative. Before that, spent a bunch of time doing various open source things. Worked on Helm, SIG service catalog, a whole bunch of other things that I can't even remember. Did a bunch of cloud work at Google, worked on cloud storage and so forth. Oh yeah, and Kubernetes a little bit. And yeah, and I'm excited that you all come here. So let's get it going.
Yep. So I'm so glad to have you both on the stream, to be honest. So folks who you are watching, so you see like the founders of Knative are with me. So isn't that cool? So you any questions that you have in mind, this is the right time. You ask them live. I'll make them answer live. Anything that it is, anything you're frustrated about, or anything you like about them, just let us know in the comment section, because I want this to be like obviously informative, but interactive, fun, and all those things. So we'll make sure that we'll cover all the things. So first off, like Matt or Ville, whoever wants to start, like the origin story, like what were the problems that you were facing at Google where you started that? So what you thought, like what led to the foundations or the origin of Knative?
Yeah, so I mean, to sort of turn back time a little bit and sort of frame things, right? If you go back to 2017-ish, when Knative really was getting started, and looked at sort of how folks talked about things like serverless and fast and EDA and Lambda, right? Like all of those things mean subtly different things, but folks used them largely interchangeably, synonymously, right? Like they meant that thing, and that thing was often, effectively AWS Lambda, which was at the time sort of the de facto standard within this category, right? And when we looked at it, right, we actually saw sort of a really compelling product, but there was actually a bunch of really interesting constituent pieces, right? And so if you think about those pieces, right, like serverless is often very sort of source-based, right? Like you bring a tiny little function, it's not even a whole program, right? A tiny little function, and that's turned into something that can be run in a sort of request-scaled environment and can be attached to events. So this stuff sort of comes and is there when you need it. One of the ways I like to describe serverless is it gives you the illusion of infinite capacity, but you only sort of pay for the bits that you're using, right? And so this ability to attach to events is really like the killer application of that, that compute abstraction. And so, while that combination of things into a product form is really compelling, the way we were looking at it, sorry, I'm reading comments as I'm trying to maintain my train of thought. The way we looked at it was these were a really compelling sort of composition of really interesting features. But I'm a Lego guy, so to make a Lego analogy, right? It's like you got this really cool Lego set that built into something really cool. You can see my Legos over there, but like it's also really interesting to be able to take apart some of those constituent pieces and do interesting things with those. So, Vila, do you want to talk about some of the sort of pain points we were seeing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So so everything that Matt says is obviously right. But the other thing also was that when you had to make a choice between am I writing an application or microservice or whatever else, or am I writing a function, at that point you have to make some choices because all those things were done differently. So if I'm writing a function, I have to turn this crank. And if I'm doing applications, I have to do that crank. And when we kept drilling down into it, we were like, that doesn't make any sense. Like if you're basically deciding to write a piece of code that responds to something, whether it be request or an event, which is we'll come back to in a little bit, it doesn't make any sense for you to have to change the workflow into it because you're still writing the code the same way. So why should your workflow be very different? And also because in some cases there is no easy way for you to go ahead and come in and saying like, well, this thing used to be a function, but now it's kind of grown up as in it's gotten bloated, it's doing too many things, and now it's an application. So now I have to go ahead and step one, rewrite it, as in like redo all my tooling. So it was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And it's more of a sliding scale in the sense where at the foundational level you have a container, and then that container can do several things. It might have multiple entry points, right? So you might have you might start from an application that has basically like, let's reads and writes, right? It does two kinds of things. And then those two things might have different scaling characteristics, for example. And you might want to go and start breaking that thing apart. So it would be very nice if you could just split that container into two, and now it might be two applications. But in the traditional world, doing things like that, where all of a sudden going from an application to a function was problematic. And go ahead.
To riff on that a little bit, there was this thing that we used to talk about at Google. I don't know if marketing still uses it, where it talks about the compute continuum, right? And you've got this variety of offerings from like at the most base level VMs, and the level of abstraction sort of raises up to containers, and at the high end you've got these sort of serverless function, or even further now, like no code platforms where you just configure things and things happen, right? But sort of changing between adjacent offerings in that world just felt so much harder than it needed to be. And so like Vila was talking about, switching from an app abstraction to a function abstraction, is just harder than it should be.
Exactly. Thanks for explaining what I was trying to say. Matt is very good at taking weird things I say and turning them into something that makes sense. So thank you for that, Matt. And then the other thing was sort of kind of and now going back in the functions land, one of the things that we thought was not exactly correct, or we thought we could do better, is that many of these functions, you have to define what it is that you're triggering or what are you responding to, and the code went along with it. So we thought that it'd be more beneficial to go ahead and do late binding, where you can go and define those two things separately, because then you can do all kinds of neat things like do a cleaner job of like rolling things out, or think about having functions as your application becomes a set of collaborating functions, and you should be able to go ahead and roll those out independently of the events they are responding to, so you can do A/B testing and everything else like that. And also, while we're talking a lot about serverless, the other thing also was that Kubernetes was, well, it still can be very, very, very hard. It's super powerful, but for most people, it's very easy to cut yourself, right? You make a typo on a label somewhere, and all of a sudden things go bad. So we wanted to go ahead and we took a big bit on Kubernetes, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later as well. But we also wanted to go and solve the user's point of view, which is like they don't have to understand everything on how everything happens. It'd be much better if we could focus on what it is that you're trying to do as a user, and then we handle those bits for you.
Yeah. So in terms of how it manifested, right? Like as Ville said, we placed a real big bet on Kubernetes, right? Like, and it didn't feel like a hard bet for us to make at the time, because it felt like it was everywhere already, and it's just continued to grow and honestly push to places that, like the edge, that I might not have anticipated a few years ago, right? But so the bet we made was that one, Kubernetes would be everywhere we would want to run and possibly more, which turned out was a pretty good bet. And with things like CRDs coming along, we wanted to bet on the Kubernetes control plane and focus on solving the problems we wanted to solve, and not building our own control planes and dealing with stuff like our own RBAC and authentication and whatnot. We wanted to embrace CRDs and bet on that ecosystem and leverage the Kubernetes control plane to do, present users with a higher level of abstraction that let them sort of solve these constituent problems of the sort of broader serverless space, right? But we also wanted to sort of enable adoption by enterprises that were already betting on Kubernetes, right? Everyone was going in the direction of Kubernetes, and we didn't want to sort of create abstractions that forced folks to redo everything that they've been doing, right? And so one of the key things was betting on the sort of core units that Kubernetes is already built around, like pods and containers, right? So that if folks are doing things like building policy or things that vet things in terms of those sort of Kubernetes atoms, right? That they don't have to go and do something new just because we came along and we do things a bit differently, right? So we wanted a lot of the policy things that they were already putting in place within their enterprise Kubernetes setup to sort of just work with Knative. So we, with these sort of principles of wanting to sort of be Kubernetes-like, bet on the Kubernetes core compute concept like containers, but just raising the level of abstraction and solving some of these areas, as well as our thinking about sort of how this space broke down, the serverless space broke down. We launched three major projects within Knative in the early days. The first was a project called Build, which we saw as solving the sort of source to container problem, right? Before I said sort of source to runnable thing, right? Well, runnable thing in Kubernetes is containers, right? And so we wanted to have a solid story for how you take source and turn it into a container, right? We wanted each of these things that we built, as I said, to be sort of independently useful, right? So that you could take apart the Lego set and go and use these things as standalone things, right? Source the container on top of Kubernetes is a really interesting thing in its own right? As are the other areas, as we'll hopefully see. And so we wanted folks to be able to bring whatever sort of build mechanism that they wanted, run it on Kubernetes to produce that container image, and then compose that with some of these other Lego pieces that we were going to build. So Docker file builds, Jib, Co, Bazel, whatever they wanted to do to produce their container build packs. And so this was ultimately spun off as the seed of what is now the Tecton project, which is why Knative does not have a build. We weren't like, okay, go start Tecton, but like we're going to compete against you with. No, that doesn't make any sense, right? So build's evolution, really, I think I see Tecton as the evolution of build. And so that was sort of the first major area, source to container, right? The next area that I talked about as being part of this sort of Lego product that, is what a lot of folks thought of as serverless was doing sort of the request-based scaling of containers, including to zero, right? And this is the project that we call serving. So the serving project basically creates a higher level of abstraction that automatically does request-based scaling based on network requests. And so if you were to try and do even 90% of what it does, forget scale to zero, just do request-based scaling and whatnot in Kubernetes, it would take quite a few different resources to try and do something like that. You'd probably have to run, something like Prometheus to handle the metrics, and the performance would be a lot slower than what we're doing because of the metric collection period and things like that, right? So we wanted to create sort of a singular abstraction that folks could use to sort of encapsulate that and get started really easily without needing to know about all of these concepts. And, basically make the sort of complexity of launching new services on Kubernetes much, much, much simpler, lower the sort of incremental complexity of adding a new microservice or adding a new function. And then the third major area is eventing, which I'll throw over to Vile.
Yeah, I'm just going to say two more things about what Matt said. One of the other things we really wanted to go and focus on is reducing the cognitive load that the user has to know when they come into Kubernetes. If you wanted to go ahead and in that day and age want to go ahead and get something up and running in Kubernetes, it was like, oh, this is easy. All I need is a pod. And then it's like, well, nothing is happening. Oh yeah, you forgot the service. And then, I need this, and this, right? So there was a lot of things that you had to go and put together and wire them up properly to make sure that you would actually have something up and running, right? So one of the things we wanted to do with the serving side was to ensure that when the user comes in, it'd be super easy for them to come in and get stuff up and running. And that would mean that the user doesn't have to understand Kubernetes as deeply to get the job that they're trying to do to get it done. And the second thing was we also wanted to make sure that if you are an OG Kubernetes person and you're like, I know everything about it, that if you look at what we are doing, it would make sense, because we had a lot of experience in basically wiring things together and how you should properly hold Kubernetes. So putting those together so that if you're a newcomer, you could come in from the top and you're like, oh, this is super easy. I can just get up and running. But if you're coming in from the bottom and you have done some of these things, you're like, awesome. You're doing all the things that I don't want to do. So thank you for that. So that was the one bit also that we were kind of trying to also hone in very, very much, really focusing on the user. As we were kind of moving along with this project, the one thing was like, this is a supernatural model for being able to be event-driven or responding to events. And in that space, we really thought hard about a few different kinds of things on sort of kind of what is the again, starting from the bottom up, right? So if we were on the serving side, we started kind of from the bottom up, like, okay, what are we betting on? Like, what are the things we know to be true or we believe to be true? Is the container. So on the eventing side, we really wanted to go ahead and standardize the format of the events. And there's the CNCF cloud event space that many of our community members have been participating from the beginning. And defining and shaping those to ensure that we have interop. So again, we wanted to go and have portable portable ways of running code in any of the clouds, including your own, and so forth. So we wanted to go and start building it up from there. Very principled approach. So cloud events, cool. And then we also wanted to go ahead and as I mentioned earlier, think about how does a user think about how do they describe and connect their flows. What we had seen in the past is that there's a lot of this emergent behavior. So somebody comes in and goes like, okay, cool, let me create a function, and 2 months later, there's like 60 of them, and you have no idea what's happening. You're like, stuff is happening, and don't ever touch anything because it works right now, right? So there was no easy way to be able to go ahead and understand what is the flow of events, what it is supposed to be. The emergent behavior is fine in the sense that you can look and look at the network traffic or flow of events, and you can understand what the system is doing. But that is different from what is it supposed to be doing, right? So that's where the model comes in, where it's very easy for you to go ahead and declaratively define what it is that you're trying to do, and then be able to go ahead and decouple the X happens, or if this, then that, if you think about it like that. And so we defined those things like brokers and triggers and so forth. And we really wanted to go ahead and again not make opinions, for example, that, oh, we must use Kafka, or we must use Rabbit, or we must use this as your messaging and persistence framework. So we wanted to go ahead and define abstractions that would allow folks that are already running in their enterprise or in their company or whatever, if they are running something, that we should be able to go and work with it. So very often we always were like, always describing like, if the step one for using anything that we build is like step one, rewrite everything. It's like, no, that's not how it works, right? Or step one, just start using this infrastructure instead of the one you're doing. So I wanted to do that. And the other thing was that we spent a lot of time thinking about the cloud events in a sense that because there were no native cloud events providers at the time, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we bridge the gap between the two things. And we spent a lot of time thinking about sources and sinks, meaning that if the Knative is kind of the Knative eventing in particular, it is the eventing box, in a sense, where you can go and define that we needed to go ahead and normalize the events that are coming in and out of there. And in the eventing space, there's a lot of work that has gone into how do those event sources look like. As an example, source would be like a GitHub. Like we ran a lot of our robots on Knative that we're triggering off of GitHub. GitHub Actions, not Actions. Actions came later. There was no GitHub Actions at the time, so we wrote our own. But the nice thing about this is that then, because we have a standard way of doing these things, there's a lot of companies that are now being able to go, or companies, contributors, they can go ahead and come in and define those sources. So like Trigger Mesh is a company that has done a lot of work in the AWS, bridging the world between AWS. We at VMware, for example, have created VMware sources so that we can take like vSphere events and fire them into Knative and so forth. And then the sync, of course, is you might want to go ahead and bring those in there, and you might have that application, if you will, that is responding to events, maybe creating new events and everything else. And you might want to go ahead and then sync them into some other external system. So there's the sources, events, and syncs. Am I forgetting something, Matt?
No, so I could just to add a couple things, right? Like one of the other interesting things about the broker being an abstraction over things like Kafka or RabbitMQ, or just something that runs in memory, is it also gives you the flexibility to have a system that's expensive in production and an ops team managing like a super complicated Kafka, or leveraging some expensive managed service in production, like, well, I don't want to say it's expensive, but something like a Google Cloud PubSub or an AWS-based system, right? Where in dev, right, on my local cluster, right, like I don't necessarily need to do that. I'll just use something in memory locally, and it's the same development model. It's just under the covers behind that abstraction, it's a different implementation that I'm running in dev versus prod, but you get the same semantics. And then, as Vile was saying, one of the ways I sort of like to describe sources is it's kind of like a no-code way of bringing events into the model, and the broker is about sort of how things bounce around within the model. And producing your own events is another cool thing I hope gets talked about in the eventing section. But so sources sort of bring events into the system, they rattle around the broker, maybe you produce new events, and then syncs are sort of how they leave the system. But it's a super cool model. Part of the reason I started to write some of the bots Vile was talking about was it was super cool, and I wanted to like hack on it, and it grew to quite a few bots because it was so much fun to play with. So I'm a fan. I'm biased, but I'm a fan. So I think there was a question before we move on. You want to read it?
Absolutely. So before that, just want to clear out some of the things. So we have discussed the kind of origin story. So the three main principles that Matt just talked about, like the build one from the source to the container. So obviously the feel that you don't need to know in-depth Kubernetes to deploy your application, have that set of thing in mind. And we actually see as of today, this space is evolving to a great extent. People are creating specific projects, which from code to deployment or code to complete application, basically the code to URL. So you have the source code, and you after that you just get the URL for the application to access. So this space is actually being actively researched on and getting the tools out there. So I really like that, because that becomes kind of a PaaS platform that gives you a code to URL. So that is something. It's good that you were thinking about that from the very early on stages. So like I think those origins and those bets that you made are actually happening now. So we are running Kubernetes everywhere. We are moving towards like code to URL. We are moving towards people not knowing much of the Kubernetes layers and abstracting them away, so that people just know the stuff that they need to know to deploy things and get things work. And because it makes sense, right? Because the Kubernetes layer is now matured, and we have been working. If you see the past releases, there have been a lot of stability improvements, security improvements. So that's pretty important, because that shows the project has gained a certain level of maturity, and we are moving towards a stable thing. So that's pretty interesting. And then second thing that you mentioned is the request based scaling, because you'll be having containers. So you'll be having like a scale whenever I need to, scale to 0, and all those things. So get things up and running even when you don't understand the Kubernetes. So that serving portion, that the second aspect. And the third aspect that Vile also shared, like the event driven approach. Obviously you want to respond to certain events and take action based on that. So the cloud events thing, the eventing stuff. So yes, I know, like I just can't imagine, but you have been through the journey, obviously. So like how difficult it would have been initially to think of the events. What can they be? Because it's a huge ecosystem, right? And when you think about different cloud vendors, who all will be the vendors that will be coming together to have the events. So all these things must have been like a good kind of experience overall for you folks, especially. So, and Vile also mentioned like reducing the cognitive load. So we don't want folks to get the load of knowing things, and knowing things exactly how they work, what are the internal workings to get their just application running. So I think that's pretty much good stuff, good origin story, good thoughts, and we are actually seeing that in action. So all these the bets that the team have been betting on, they are happening as of now, and they are still in the innovative space. So people are still innovating on top of that and creating new things for that. So pretty interesting.
Can
Also, Carlos mentioned one comment, which was serverless is not just fast. Glad to have the two folks explaining. So I actually agree to the point. So it's not just a fast thing. So like it's much more wider domain that just that Matt and Ville has just explored. Yeah, you were saying something, Ville. Please go
Oh,
ahead.
I was going to go and say one more. The source to URL thing is really cool. One of the things that we didn't really talk about was that is what we call the day zero. So there was a lot of ways for you to go ahead and say like, oh, hey, run my code, and it's like cool. And then, but one of the things we also wanted to make sure is that the Knative system will grow with you. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the models and the resources in such a way that it's going to go with you. It's going to grow with you, so that it has the day 0, 1, 2, and n, so that it grows with you. And with the cognitive load, the idea was, look, it's easy for me to get stuff up and running with just understanding one resource. And then you start asking questions like, well, how do I use it in anger, right, in prod? And then you're like, okay, cool, well, now you need to maybe learn a new resource, but it grows with you, not where we just dump everything on you right off the bat. So that was very important also from the beginning.
So Omer had a question too about, let's see, for
Oh,
VLA, in your
yeah.
view, how does the proliferation of cloud events impact Knative adoption?
Yep.
Well, I hope it's going to go ahead and impact positively, in a sense that if we basically if we can go ahead and see more and more of the vendors, which we are seeing, betting on cloud events, then we have the event execution framework, if you will, that will just plug in, because you can feed it cloud events on the way in and on the way out, so that Knative can be a very nice way for you to go and run your business logic. If you will. And then you can go ahead and utilize whatever you already have in your system. So it's fairly trivial for us to go ahead and add eventing capabilities into your existing applications by basically posting a cloud event. So you don't have to again do the whole, okay, you wanna utilize this, step one, rewrite everything. It's like, no, we can just kind of do something simpler.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Omer?
Yep. So I think that should have answered. So we'll see that in the chat.
Okay.
And so now that we know the origin story, what was some of the thought process and the way that the program was structured? If I ask you this simple question, like to answer it to someone who doesn't know Knative, like what is Knative? So how would you define that to to a person who doesn't know what Knative is? Okay, we can take this like they know what Kubernetes is. So with that respect, what would be your like 1 or 2 minute things on like what Knative is?
You want to do this one, or you want me to do this one?
Well, why don't you take a crack at it, and then I'll correct you. How's that?
Yeah, perfect. So I would describe Kubernetes as a really great, resilient platform that is very low level, right, and much lower level than you really want to present to a significant number of developers within your organization, right? And so, as I was saying before, and as Ville was saying, right, like the incremental complexity of adding just one more service, to a complex architecture is quite high right now with Kubernetes. You have to manage a whole bunch of concepts and do a whole lot of things, right? Ingress, services, deployments, HPAs, and on and on and on, right? Serverless to me is all about reducing the number of those things you need to think about to enable focus. Really, the developer productivity in general, right, is about enabling folks to focus on delivering their core value as infrastructure nerds, we find those things interesting and we solve those. But like, person working on delivering business logic, that's what they want to be focusing on, not all this other stuff, right? So we wanted to create abstractions that captured large categories of workloads, like HTTP-based requests. Most APIs these days manifest as stateless HTTP-based APIs, right? So we wanted to present abstractions that enabled folks to launch new services that did that kind of thing with very little sort of overhead, right? And have them be, as near to production ready as they would probably get it with a lot of elbow grease. And so, so on the serving side, I think that's really what it's about, raising that level of abstraction. And then to me, event-driven architecture is the killer application of this request-based compute. And so on the eventing side, it wasn't really about sort of raising the level of abstraction. These abstractions don't exist really in Kubernetes. You have to sort of go to a million different sources and deal with eventing systems directly. And so this was really about defining abstractions that folks could use that composed with what we were doing in serving in order to enable you to, within the Kubernetes resource model, reason about events at this high level and, ideally with no code, bring events into the system, route it around, and then all you are focusing on in terms of code is those little bits of code that are really as much the business logic as possible, and we take care of the rest.
Yeah.
How did you feel like?
That was great. So that is really focusing on the user. The other thing also is that we, or at least I do not believe that Knative is the end all be all. I think there's a lot of innovation that is left, obviously, on top of it, right? So just like with the Kubernetes, there was a lot of thought that went into defining the proper principal resources that would allow for portable cloud native frameworks, right? So at the time, before Kubernetes was started, right, you had to take a choice on the clouds if you wanted to do that, and it was not portable, right? So with the Kubernetes, we basically came in and said, okay, here are the kinds of things that you want and need in order to be able to be portable across the clouds. So that was that. But with Kubernetes, that was more like, I like to call it the cloud assembly language. And so this, again, is not necessarily for the user, but it's for the people that are building the next set of cool things, right? So a lot of people are building on Kubernetes. But we wanted to go ahead and with the Knative, I like to think of it as maybe libc, which is the next set of abstractions that then folks can come in and build cooler things, because if you reduce the load on their mind and they can just focus on building with fewer resources that do what they do, then obviously it's going to be easier for folks. So that is another way to think about it in my mind. So Matt did a great job on the user side, but I'm also thinking about it the next set of infrastructure folks. So just like we were building on top of shoulders of giants or whatever you say, we are hoping that we are also building reusable building blocks that allow you to go ahead and come in. And this again sort of kind of comes back in the early point about why we spend a lot of time breaking things apart. So we did not want to build a PaaS or a FaaS or anything else like that. We wanted to build reusable blocks that you could choose that would feel, we spent a lot of time talking about roles and responsibilities in the project, and sort of kind of like, if you can look at a box in your system, it has certain roles and responsibilities that it provides. So that was also another way that we thought about it, in a sense that you should be able to get value out of it, even if you choose not to take all of them. So.
Yeah. So yeah, as Vila said, I was talking about sort of the end user piece of it. I think one of the things that the main group that I think typically see adopting this isn't even necessarily end users. It's sort of platform engineering teams that want to sort of handle that last mile of sort of flavoring to present a sort of PaaS or fast platform to internal users at large enterprises. So, basically core platform engineering team within, large institution sort of takes some of these pieces and, wraps it with some of their company stuff to present, a fast like abstraction to their internal users, right? And enabling those kinds of platform builders to take it that last mile and leverage Knative to do those things, I personally see as great success. And we've seen lots of folks doing this. There's a whole bunch of, I think, more visible commercial offerings around it from the major vendors that are involved. Google has, the Cloud Run line of things. VMware has, I believe, what's called Cloud Native Runtimes. Red Hat has OpenShift Serverless. IBM launched Code Engine. There's also, a set of fast products sort of that build on this, but aren't necessarily as involved upstream. I think Scaleway gave a talk on building a fast with Tecton and Knative, and there's a bunch of others. There's startups in the space like Trigger Mesh, building offerings around this that try and capture that sort of fast model too. So it's been very humbling to see all of the different offerings emerge around this thing, but everyone is doing their own little last mile thing on top of that. But the number of folks we've been able to do that thing, I think it's very validating.
Interesting. Wanted to ask in the chat, like, did you know, like these folks will give the introduction to Knative in this way? Because I didn't think they have actually given the kind of use case introduction with respect to the users, with respect to the platform engineers, what exactly Knative means to them, and really liked the success that the official offerings are there. The Cloud Run is there, and all sorts of things which are based on Knative. So you can actually see, obviously, you can see the success of those services, and obviously these are built on Knative. So you can just imagine like how cool that product is. So which is leading to the commercial offerings that people are doing, and those commercial offerings are in turn successful. So that means they are helping folks, and that means the Knative is driving those innovations. Yes, Matt, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I'm going to plug one more thing, which is, I think a lot of the engagement we saw early on, because, our getting started experience wasn't great, were a lot of these folks like, the hardcore platform engineer folks. The Knative 101 session, I think Carlos is going to do that, I think, next. I think it's the next session. He and Omer have been working on trying to improve that getting started experience so it's much more approachable by folks who aren't necessarily sort of hardcore platform engineers, and improve that for sort of more direct usage. But yeah, so I wanted to make sure to plug that, and hopefully y'all go and see what Carlos has to show on I think Monday, right?
Yep, 26th. So yep, Carlos in the chat will be doing the next stream with us and explaining what Knative is in terms of kind of technical terms, then the architecture, how it works, and all these stuff. But this you won't get anywhere. So this is something that is coming from the experience, from the builders who have been there, who have been through the journey, who have been through the thought process. Because when you think about building the product, there are a lot of things that you need to analyze first, that you need to predict what will happen in the next 5 years, and then you start building, you start again reworking, you start again building and reworking, building, and then with the help of community we get to that particular stage. So I think that's pretty interesting, and that's why we are here, to understand those sort of stuff. So now we know the origin story, we know what Knative means for the end users, we know what Knative means for the platform engineers, we know there are services, commercial offerings built around Knative, we know how awesome it is. So let's talk now about the governance. What was the governance before? And was it only because it was started at Google? So how did it evolve? How did the governance involve, and how you people made more communities to getting involved in that, contributing that, adaptability and all those things?
Sure. So since it's an origin story, let's go back to the origins, right? So one of the things that we wanted to do from the early on was not to build yet another product done by Google or whatever. It doesn't. It's not the fact that it was just the Googles. But we basically spent a lot of time bringing in folks from our friends, maybe from previous worlds, right? So whether it was Red Hats or IBMs or SAPs or whatnots, on sort of kind of saying like, hey, we would like to go ahead and build this project that is super widely participated, because many of the things that we thought we would be needing to build would be something that everybody would need to solve. So instead of 6 companies solving these problems, let's go ahead and solve them once so that everybody can benefit from them. Okay. So we went out there and chatted with folks, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we are in. Let's go do this," and so forth. And um, that was good. And then there was always kind of the implicit or explicit assumption, depends on who you ask, that eventually the goal would be that we would be donating this, especially because I had been involved in the Kubernetes and it was in the CNCF. The assumption was that we would also be getting this stuff off the ground, and eventually it would be donated to CNCF. Okay. Fast forward, or I guess rewind now because we are living in the future. Go to the summer of 2019, I think it was. Holy Nikes, time flies fast. There was this announcement that caused a lot of gasp, shock, amazement, where there was Google announced that they were basically not donating. There was an explicit statement that they're not donating Knative and Istio at the time to CNCF, and that caused a lot of unhappiness in the community, because it was always like, well, I thought that we thought that it was going to go into CNCF. And that sort of kind of started then a series of uncomfortable questions on sort of kind of like, what does it mean then? Like, who owns this and who can decide and so forth, right? And out of that, we basically spent about a year or so, no, 6 months probably say. It probably felt like 2 years, on the community, which was amazing because the entire community came together and spent a lot of time talking about what it is that we want out of the governance. What do we want the community to look like? Matt, you're going to say something.
Yeah, so I just, one of the things that I think got conflated a lot in the early parts of this discussion were, the expectations around project going to CNCF and the conflation between sort of foundation ownership and neutral governance, right? So, talking about sort of who owns the mark and how the governance of the project is structured are two both interesting things, but how the project was governed was a lot of what it came back to when you really drilled into why folks were interested in the project moving into CNCF. It's not the only reason, but it was one of the things most often cited when you start to pull on that thread. So.
Right, and yeah, so and obviously there's a lot of things that come out that CNCF provides that have nothing to do with the governance, but those are the kinds of things that, like, vendor neutral training materials, for example, or marketing, or everything else that we didn't really have or do at all. So that was another side, and I think that's sort of kind of what Matt's hinting at, that was also one of the things that we had been expecting to get out eventually. But yeah, the governance. So basically, the governance. There was a couple of concerns that the community had. So in the initial TOC, so the Technical Oversight Committee, there was 3 people in it. So there was me, Matt, and Evan, and we were all working at Google, and that was fine. Then we went to VMware, and then folks were concerned about that we can't have just all these folks be in a single company because they are evil. And so we just, there was a lot of work on getting the TOC to be governed by more than just a single vendor majority, and there was elections done for that. So, but we needed to go and have somebody vote off the island. So obviously, Matt and everyone were like, "Relay, get out of here." So I left TOC and in tears, and then.
So part of the conversation there was, in terms of bootstrapping, right? We could have added four people to it, but I think we all agreed that that was probably too many cooks in the kitchen, and 5 was probably a better number. And Vilay very graciously agreed to step back to make room for other folks so that we could achieve vendor neutrality without just I guess stuffing the court is the turn of phrase these days, right?
Yeah. So anyway, the elections went in, and we got 5 people in there, and 5 fantastic people. And since then, we've had another set of elections, and that part is all going great. And then we kind of started looking at, okay, well, the TOC has been handled, right? And then the second point we wanted to do is, okay, well, how do we deal with the steering side of the house, which is, again, this was all, there was, I think there was 7 at some point for the steering in the initial one. So there was 4 from Google and 3 from, I think there's 1 from Pivotal / VMware, IBM, and Red Hat. And so then we decided to reduce that down to 5. And this was the whole point about the big 6-month-long conversation, which was like, we really wanted to go ahead and get the steering vendor neutral and no majorities. And the second one was, how does the trademark look like? Like, who owns the marks? How does that get handled, and so forth? So out of that very long and tedious conversations, we got the model for the steering, where it is elected, and there are elections held yearly, which we did last year, 2020. Yes. So now we have 5 folks in the steering and no single vendor majority. And then we also created a trademark committee that has basically 3 companies in it. So there is representation from Google, there's representation from IBM, and there's representation from VMware. So those 3 companies run the trademark committee. And one of the things that I think is super, personally, is being very good is that now all those meetings are public, and they are recorded, and folks can show up and ask questions, uncomfortable questions. And it's been really nice to see community participating in those conversations, as well as we are now working towards getting the conformance tests and towards 1.0. So there's a lot of work that is happening on the trademark committee, and making sure that we can achieve the portability that we set out to build in the first place, so that you as a user can have a high degree of confidence that if you are running a Knative certified, whether it's eventing or serving, that you can take a bet that I can go and use multi-clouds, I can choose the best of clouds, and they should be able to compete on their merits. And yeah, I think, did I forget something, Matt? I know we are running kind of out of time here.
Just to sort of recap, right? Like we've had this election model for TOC now for a while, and the TOC has reached the point where, at this point, everyone seated on the TOC has been elected to that position. So we are no longer even in the bootstrap period of TOC. Every single person was elected by the community to those posts. Steering's about halfway there. The election that was held before, I think, Vilay and Paul Mori were elected, and the next round of elections, I think, will effectively bring it into a fully elected status. So we've finally sort of got clarity in terms of governance around how you grow from new person joining the project, getting started, through to working group lead, all the way up to TOC or steering, and how that process works. It's all in our governance docs, and really that's open to anyone who participates in the community now. I think there's, I'm not sure whether the community has done anything about sort of how trademark committee sort of varies year to year. But in terms of vendors, right? But in terms of the sort of individual elements, I believe that it's all been sort of not just fully defined, but we've also almost completely left the bootstrap period. There's one more election before, you know, we're really in that rhythm, and I think that's a really great place to be personally.
Yeah, and that's happening this fall, probably about October timeframe.
Yeah.
So it's right around the corner. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So Carlos, yeah. So and also the community side of the house, we have a monthly meetup that I strongly suggest folks to come and check out. There's always something interesting there. There's always sort of kind of, if you don't have a lot of time to go ahead and participate in like working group meetings or TOCs or steerings, the monthly meetup is great because it gives you a quick overview of what's happening at the project level, and then there's always folks that are doing some interesting demos and so forth. So I think that's I thanks Carlos. That's a great plug.
They're also recorded, so if you want to see cool demos of folks doing stuff with Knative, you can look at past ones. And if you're doing something cool with Knative, you should reach out. And you know, if you want a demo to the community, you know, it's open to anyone. You just need to. I think there's a form to fill out unless it's changed. So.
Yep, I think that's pretty interesting to know about the governance, because I remember that there was a huge buzz on Twitter that was trending the other day when Google announced that they are not donating Knative and Istio to the CNCF, and there were a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and I mean, even from the founders of Kubernetes, who have written the base for that. I mean, everyone was having their own opinions, but it's good to see that the governance is still like multi-vendor thing, so it's not controlled by a single vendor. There are proper elections, there is a proper steering committee, so that there is trust for the end users. Like, it is not owned by, and suddenly one day it will not be just licensed, or it will just go away and not be open source and things like that. So I think that gives enough trust for the end users, which is important. And that's why every open source project in the cloud native ecosystem goes to CNCF. Obviously, all the things that Ville mentioned, like the marketing and the all the resources that you get from CNCF, plus you get the trust that since it is falling under the umbrella of CNCF, so you have that trust factor. You can use that, and obviously in the different stages, the sandbox, incubating, graduated, so you can use them in with respect to the production scenarios that you want. But nevertheless, you have now the governance that is explained very clearly by both of the awesome people that you're seeing on the screen, except me. I am also awesome, but to an extent. But you know about the governance, you know where it stands, because they have clearly told all the things which were not right at that point of time. And Ville did step down as TOC, and did pave way for the other folks to join. So you can imagine, like, people wanted, I mean, these folks wanted the project to grow. They wanted the project to have multiple vendors and contributions coming in, and end users to trust the project and use that. So that's where the this thing, community meetups, is there. So I think that is a great way to have that. So a couple of questions that are coming, like we have good governance now. A couple of comments from Carlos, so which is which is good.
I see Carlos has become the new Mark by doing the good typo, the Knative. I love that. That's always Mark.
Oh, I don't even see it anymore. I just got squeezed a month.
Yes.
Well, the last thing I'll plug on governance, right? Like, it didn't start perfect, and while we think we're improving things, and we've taken a lot of feedback and reached this new elected model, if there are aspects of governance that of the Knative governments that are prohibited for you or your company getting involved, you should reach out and give that feedback. Like, we don't know we don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know what problems exist with these models if you don't tell us. So please reach out if there are still things that about the governance model that your company or yourself are sort of standoffish about. I mean, I think we want to hear those things so that we know.
Yeah, that's a good way, because one of the things in the steering we have done is we have approached many of the companies that had expressed concerns in the past, and we approached them, and we have heard from them. They're like, okay, this is good for now, right? Like, good job. But to Matt's point, if you are watching this, or if you have friends or whatever that are like, yeah, Knative is not good for me or my company, then please reach out to us. You can do this in private. I think I spelled my Twitter there right, or Matt. You can ping us there, or just come join us at the steering, and please explain those. We are very approachable, or we try to be.
Yes, we try to be. If there's someone you're comfortable reaching out to, I personally find a lot of the folks in our community very approachable. Find someone you're comfortable to give that feedback to, and we can try and help champion that perspective to the broader group.
Amazing. So I think we have talked a lot about the origin story, the governance, how the community is working, what things have changed over the period of time, what were the main focus areas, initial thought process, the key aspects of building Knative, where it stands now, and some of the great folks who have joined the chat as well. So people appreciate like the Knative, some of the cool products that you already use, you might be using the commercial offerings built on top of Knative. So thank you, Matt, for doing that. And thank you, Ville, for telling about the TOC, the steering, the process is transparent. We have the community meetings, everything is recorded. So the transparency obviously increases the trust. Again, still they are open to listen if there are any issues. So I think that itself shows like use Knative. If you have any issues, reach out in terms of governance, in terms of technical issues, or any other thing. And even if you want to showcase that how you are using Knative, community meetups is a great place. So thank you both for sharing all the tremendous knowledge, all the journey that you have been through for the awesome project that we'll be learning now over the next few days. So next up is actually Knative 101, where you'll be learning the technical details of Knative, how it actually works under the hood. And Carlos, who has been super awesome in the chat, so he will be there with us explaining everything, and we'll be having a super cool demo as well. So that it will be interesting. And again, thank you, Matt, for helping me out arranging all the series. We are still arranging the final bits actually. So it's pretty interesting, and bringing something like this actually involves a lot of effort. So you can imagine the amount of folks that we have reached out, the email chains that might have gone through. Now we also have a Slack group that we'll be partnering around later on after the series. So we have done this so that the community knows more about Knative, because it is really something which is the high tech, because it is built on the principles that we are seeing today, and they are even still evolving and innovating. So I'm really happy and super hyped up about the series, and the first session was rock on. So Matt and Ville, you have been super awesome. So I can't thank you enough for being here, spending your time explaining your journeys and explaining about Knative, because you have put your hearts out there, your hard work out there. So really thank you for explaining all the stuff that you have done over the past.
Yeah, thanks for having us and reaching out. This has been awesome, and I'm excited for the rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please go check out all the amazing content that is coming, and thank you for all the folks that tuned in. Hope this was useful, and if there's any questions, comments, thoughts, we are here. Reach out.
And he's very active on Knative Slack, so if you want to reach out that way, that's a really good medium for connecting with the rest of the community.
Yep, that's what I was about to say, like, there's a Knative Slack channel, so make sure you join that, because that's where all the fun around Knative will happen, and you'll get all the updates. And yeah, you can see all three Twitter handlers on our images, so make sure you follow that and ask any questions, tag Matt or Ville anytime you want, and any questions you can ask them publicly so that they're forced to answer them publicly. So you can do that as well. So yeah, do anything. I mean, these are super awesome folks and super reachable. So you can reach out, have a chat. Matt is on vacation, don't disturb him too much, but still it's fine. So thank you both for tuning in, and thank you all folks for joining in. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do that, because this content obviously takes a lot of my energy in doing those. So thank you all, and make sure you tune in on 26 same time, 8 a.m. PT and 8:30 a.m. IST, so that we can have awesome Carlos explaining about Knative in technical depth 101 that you can try on your own as well. So thank you all. Have a nice rest of your day, evening, night, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.